The lobby of the Meridian Grand smelled of white lilies and fresh lacquer, the kind of quiet that money bought deliberately. Marble floors reflected the late afternoon light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking 16th Street. A pianist at the far end of the room played something unhurried, something European, something that had no opinion about the world outside. Eleanor Grace Morrison stood near the center display case with her reading glasses low on her nose. She was 62 years old, her posture the kind that courtrooms teach and never fully let go. Her skin was the color of dark mahogany, smooth at the temples, lined at the corners of her eyes in the way that decades of concentration line a face. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back and precise. She wore a navy blazer over cream silk pearls at her collar, and the kind of calm that comes from having nothing left to prove. She was looking at a brooch. It sat on the third shelf of the glass case mounted on black velvet, tagged in small gold lettering. Edwardian cameo brooch, circa 1908, on loan from the Smithsonian Institution. The profile on the ivory oval was a woman in profile surrounded by a delicate gold frame. Eleanor had seen one exactly like it. She had held one exactly like it once at her grandmother's kitchen table in Baltimore 40 years ago. The memory was specific and clean. It arrived without announcement. Her grandmother's name was Cora Jean Morrison. She had been born in 1929 in Rockville, Maryland, to a family of sharecroppers who had moved north before she could walk. She had worked for 41 years as a seamstress in a dry goods shop on Charles Street, the kind of work that ruined your back before you were 50 and gave you hands that could thread a needle in total darkness. She had owned one brooch, a cameo, ivory and gold, a woman's profile in bas relief. The gold frame scalloped at the edges in a pattern that Eleanor had memorized before she started school. Cora Jean wore it to church on Sundays and to family dinners and to the 3 occasions in her life when she went somewhere that she considered worth honoring with her best self. When Eleanor was 7 years old, Cora Jean had placed it in her palm and let her hold it. She had said, "This is older than your grandfather. It is older than the building we live in." The woman in the picture is no one in particular, and every woman in particular. You hold it carefully because careful is how we keep what we love. Eleanor had held it carefully. She had thought about that brooch at her bar exam. She had thought about it at her swearing in to the federal bar. She had thought about it at the opening of every gala for 11 years, standing in the corridor before she walked through the doors, because the work of the gala was about justice, and justice was what Cora Jean Morrison had raised her to understand before she had a word for it. The brooch in the Smithsonian case was not Cora Jean's brooch, but it was from the same period, the same style, the same grammar of an era when a woman's cameo was the one beautiful thing a family passed forward like a deed. She tilted her head slightly. Behind her, the lobby moved with the controlled activity of a hotel preparing for a major event. Staff in dark uniforms moved with purpose. Floral arrangements the size of small trees were being positioned near the grand staircase. A woman in a headset crossed the marble floor 3 times in 5 minutes. The Morrison Foundation annual Justice Gala was scheduled to begin at 7 o'clock in the ballroom on the 4th floor. 400 guests, 11 years running. Eleanor had given the opening keynote at every single one. At the front desk, a young woman named Diana Chen watched her computer screen and typed with efficiency. Diana was 28 years old. She had been with the Meridian Grand for 3 years. She had personally checked Eleanor Morrison into Suite 1201 every November since her 2nd month on the job. She knew the room the way she knew her own schedule. King bed with the firm mattress, east-facing window, the corner desk where Eleanor spread her papers each morning. The hotel's system listed Eleanor under Platinum Lifetime Membership, a designation given personally by the hotel's founder to fewer than 12 guests in the building's history. The check-in today had been at 3:47 in the afternoon. Diana had run the card herself. On the 3rd floor, in a corridor that faced the building's west courtyard, a small brass plaque read, "The Morrison Wing," dedicated in gratitude to the Morrison Foundation, Benefactors of Justice Education, 2018. Eleanor did not think about the plaque. She rarely did. She thought about the brooch. The history of how the Morrison wing came to exist was not complicated, though the work that preceded it had been. Eleanor had spent 22 years as a federal prosecutor in the District of Columbia, 33 years total in the practice. She had tried 219 cases. She had won 186. She had built a reputation not on theater, though she was capable of theater when it was required, but on the architecture of argument, the way a case is constructed from the foundation up, so that when the opposing counsel pulls at a single thread, nothing comes loose. She had prosecuted city officials and corporate executives and men who had used their positions to harm people who had no position at all, and she had done it in a way that the record reflected clearly, without ambiguity, without the possibility of later revision. The Morrison Foundation was not a retirement project. She had started it at 51 while still practicing because she had watched enough young lawyers come through the federal system without any understanding of what the law was actually for. Not the rules of it, the purpose of it, the original intent, the thing that the drafters were trying to protect when they put the words down in the first place. She had started funding law school scholarships, then legal clinics, then the annual gala, which had grown from a dinner for 60 to an event for 400 because people wanted to be part of something that was actually doing something. The matching gift for the Morrison wing had come from her grandmother's estate. Cora Jean Morrison had died in 2011 at 82, still in the same house on Charles Street where she had lived for 50 years. She had left very little in the way that women who spend their lives doing careful, invisible work leave very little. A house, a small savings account, the cameo brooch, and a letter for Eleanor written in the handwriting of someone who had never written anything but grocery lists and church bulletins, and still managed to say exactly what she meant. The letter had said, "The one thing that lasts is what you build for others while you still can. Everything else is temporary." Eleanor had read the letter 3 times the day she received it. She had read it once more before filing the matching gift paperwork. She had not told anyone about the letter. It was not the kind of thing that needed to be told. It was the kind of thing that simply becomes the structure of the decisions that follow. On the 4th floor in the anteroom adjacent to the ballroom, James Whitford sat at the head of a long conference table reviewing the gala seating chart with the event director. He was 64, silver-haired, in a tuxedo jacket over an open collar, the way a man dresses when he has been in business long enough not to need to impress. He had built the Meridian Grand from a gutted government building in 2001. He knew every square foot of the property. He had that morning at 11:15 walked Eleanor Morrison through the lobby display case himself, pointing out the Edwardian brooch because he had remembered what she told him 3 years ago about her grandmother. He was on his 3rd page of the seating chart when his phone buzzed. At the far end of the lobby near the entrance, a woman in a cream wrap dress named Margaret Holloway was speaking quietly into her cell phone. She was 58 years old. She had arrived at the Meridian Grand that afternoon as a guest of a gala sponsor and had been standing near the entrance for 11 minutes, having come down from her room early to watch the gala setup proceed. She was not a member of the Morrison Foundation. She had not attended a gala before. She had been invited because her husband's firm had purchased a table as a client relations gesture, and she had come because the hotel was beautiful and the evening sounded significant. She had been watching Eleanor near the display case for 4 minutes. She had watched Eleanor take the reading glasses from her blazer pocket and put them on. She had watched Eleanor lean forward slightly to read the placard on the 3rd shelf. She had watched Eleanor tilt her head with the specific angle of someone who recognized what they were looking at. She had watched Eleanor's hands remain at her sides for the entirety of that time. She had not seen anything that suggested tampering. She had seen a black woman in a navy blazer standing at a jewelry display in the lobby of a hotel, and something in her had translated this into a category that a complaint form could express and a phone call could initiate, and she had done both of those things without pausing long enough to ask herself what exactly she believed she had witnessed. The answer, if she had looked at it directly, was a woman looking at a brooch. But she had not looked at it directly. She had looked at it through the particular lens of a conviction she did not know she carried, and the complaint form had been right there on the guest services stand, and the number for hotel security had been printed at the bottom. She made the call. The afternoon light shifted as a cloud moved across the sun. The piano continued, unhurried. Eleanor looked at the brooch for another moment, then straightened, folded her reading glasses into her blazer pocket, and picked up the portfolio she had set on the low table beside the display case. Inside was the keynote. She had revised it twice in the past 2 days. She walked toward the elevator bank with the measured pace of someone who knows the building's rhythms and has no reason to rush. She was 12 feet from the elevator when the lobby doors opened and Officer Ryan Buckley walked in. He was 33 years old. He was thick in the neck and narrow in the eyes. His uniform was pressed to a crease you could cut paper on. He moved through the lobby entrance with the bearing of a man who expected space to be made for him. A radio crackled at his shoulder. His hand rested near his belt with no particular purpose. He had received a call about a suspicious individual tampering with hotel property. He had the address. He had the report. He had made a decision before he crossed the threshold. His eyes moved across the lobby. They stopped on Eleanor. She had not yet noticed him. She was pressing the elevator button. She was thinking about the third paragraph of her keynote, which she had rewritten 4 times, and still felt incomplete. The elevator did not come immediately. Buckley crossed the lobby floor. He was 6 feet behind her when she heard the footsteps and turned. She did not startle. Her dark eyes moved to him, measured him in a beat, and stayed level. He said, "Ma'am, I need a moment." She said, "Of course." Her voice was deep and unhurried. It was the voice of someone who had spent 3 decades speaking in federal courtrooms and had never needed to raise it to be heard. He said, "Are you a guest at this hotel?" She said, "I am. Suite 1201. I checked in at 3:47 this afternoon." He said, "I'll need to see some identification." She said, "May I ask what this is about?" He said, "We received a report about someone at the display case." She said, "I was looking at a brooch. There is a display case near the center of the lobby. I was looking at a piece on the 3rd shelf." He said, "Were you touching the case?" She said, "I was not." Buckley looked at her for a long moment. Something in his jaw worked slightly. He said, "Identification, please." Diana Chen had looked up from the front desk. She could see the interaction from 30 feet away. Something in its shape was immediately familiar to her. She moved from behind the desk. Eleanor opened her portfolio, removed a small wallet, and produced her driver's license. She also removed her hotel key card. It was not the standard issue white card. It was gold heavy for its size, with the Meridian Grand crest embossed in relief, and her name in raised lettering along the lower edge. She offered both. Buckley took the license. He did not take the key card. He looked at the license. He looked at her. He looked at the display case across the lobby. He said, "Have you had any contact with the jewelry display in the past 30 minutes?" She said, "I stood at the display case and looked at a brooch. I did not touch the glass." Diana Chen arrived at his left shoulder. She said, "Officer, I can help clarify this. Ms. Morrison is—" He cut her off without looking at her. He said, "I'll handle this. Diana said she's our Platinum Lifetime member. I personally checked her in today. I have her profile." He said, still not looking at Diana, "Step back, please." Diana did not step back. She stood her ground, a slight narrowing of her eyes, the only indication that she was working very hard at composure. She said, "I would like to show you her member profile, sir. It has her photograph." He glanced at Diana briefly. He said, "I said I'll handle this." He turned back to Eleanor. He said, "There's been a report of someone attempting to access the display case. You were in the area." She said, "I was in the area because I was looking at an item on display. I did not attempt to access the case." He said, "The report indicates the person was attempting to open the case." She said, "I did not attempt to open the case. There are security cameras in this lobby. They will confirm that." Buckley looked at his notepad. He looked at her. The gala guests were beginning to move through the lobby, now men in tuxedos, women in evening gowns. Several had slowed. Several were watching. He said, "I'm going to need you to step to the side with me while I verify this." She said, "I would prefer to remain here while you verify." He said, "Ma'am, step to the side." His voice had changed register. It was quiet and it was hard. She looked at him for exactly 3 seconds. Then she stepped to the side. She did not do it because she was afraid. She did not do it because she believed he had authority she was required to obey in this moment. She did it because 33 years of federal practice had taught her the geometry of power, and she knew that the lobby of this hotel in the next 90 minutes was not the right room for the confrontation she could feel approaching. There was a science to this that most people never understood, and that she had spent decades learning in the hardest possible classrooms. The science was not submission. The science was not silence. The science was timing. The science was the ability to absorb the immediate insult without allowing it to consume the longer strategy. She had watched colleagues respond to provocation with exactly the force the provocation was designed to extract, and she had watched them lose. Not because they were wrong, because they were reactive, and reactive energy burned itself out before it could be directed. She had been called to a federal hearing once in her 31st year of practice by a committee that had investigated her conduct in a case involving a sitting congressman. She had sat in that room for 6 hours, while men who had not tried a case in 20 years questioned the integrity of work she had built over 3 months of meticulous evidence collection. She had answered every question in the same register with the same measured precision, and she had never raised her voice above the level of ordinary conversation. At the end of the 6 hours, the committee chairman had looked at his colleagues and said, "I don't know what we thought we were going to find here, gentlemen, but I don't think we found it." She had walked out of that building into the afternoon sun, stood on the sidewalk for exactly 30 seconds, and then returned to her office and finished drafting the brief that was due the following morning. She knew how to wait. She would choose her room. She always chose her room. He called for backup. The radio crackled. Another unit was nearby. Diana stood at his left shoulder and did not move. She pulled out her own phone and began pulling up the hotel's member management system. Her hands were steady. The pianist played on. No one had told him to stop. The backup unit was a man named Officer Marcus Harris. He was 42, heavier, with the eyes of someone who had been doing this long enough to read a room before he entered it. He came through the lobby doors and made his way to Buckley's side, and took in the scene in the way experienced officers do, quickly, quietly, and without committing to a conclusion. He looked at Eleanor. He looked at Buckley. He looked at Diana Chen, who was showing something on her phone to no one in particular because no one was accepting the offer. Harris said quietly to Buckley, "What have we got?" Buckley said guest reported tampering with the jewelry display. This individual was at the case. Harris looked at Eleanor. He said, "Ma'am, can you tell me your name?" She said, "Eleanor Grace Morrison. I am a guest in Suite 1201. I have been a guest at this hotel for 15 years. I was looking at a display piece that resembles a brooch that belonged to my grandmother. I did not touch the case. I did not tamper with anything." Harris held her gaze for a moment. Something moved through his face, a recognition of something complicated, but he deferred. He said nothing more. Buckley had moved closer to Eleanor. He was within arm's reach. He said, "I'm going to need you to open your bag." She said, "I am not going to open my bag without a specific reason and a specific authority to require it." He said, "I have reason to believe you may have taken an item from the display." She said that belief is not supported by anything observable. The display case is intact. No alarm has sounded. I have produced my identification and my hotel key card. I have offered you full access to the hotel's security record and to my membership file. He said, "I'm not asking again. Open the bag." His hand moved. It closed on her elbow. The lobby went quiet, in the way that lobbies go quiet when something has crossed a line that marble floors and piano music were not designed to absorb. Eleanor did not pull away. She did not raise her voice. She stood absolutely still. Her portfolio under one arm, her bag at her other side, his hand on her elbow in the center of the lobby of the hotel whose wing bore her name, and she did not give him anything. She was thinking about her grandfather. She was thinking about the way he used to say the ones who need to shout are the ones who know they have nothing. She did not shout. A man in a tuxedo near the grand staircase took a step forward. His name was Raymond Price. He was 71 years old. He had served 2 terms in the United States Senate representing the state of Georgia. He had a face the color of aged walnut and the bearing of a man who had spent 40 years fighting in rooms that tried to convince him he did not belong. He knew Eleanor Morrison. He had known her since she prosecuted a case against a sitting city councilman in 2004, a case that everyone told her she could not win, a case she won in 11 days. He said, "Young man, do you know who you're speaking to?" Buckley did not look at him. He said, "Sir, step back." Raymond said, "I will not step back. That woman is..." Buckley said, "Step back, now." Raymond did not step back. He held his position, his eyes steady, his hands at his sides. He looked at Eleanor. She looked at him with the smallest movement of her head that said, "I see you. Stand down." He pulled out his phone. He began recording. The hotel's security chief, a man named Walter Mack, arrived from the direction of the service corridor. He was broad-shouldered and professional, a former police officer himself, 20 years in hotel security. He assessed the situation in seconds. He moved to Buckley's side. He said, "Officer, I'm the security chief. Can I assist?" Buckley said, "Yes. I need to know if this individual is a registered guest." Mack turned to Diana Chen. Diana said, "Yes. She is. I have her check-in record right here. I have her photograph in the membership system. She is a Platinum Lifetime member. There are fewer than 12 people in the world who hold that card." Mack looked at Eleanor. He looked at the card she was still holding. He looked at Buckley. Buckley produced the written complaint from his pocket. It was on a hotel form, a guest complaint sheet filled in by Margaret Holloway, time-stamped 23 minutes ago. It said, "Suspicious individual, dark clothing lingering at display case, appeared to attempt access." Eleanor was wearing a navy blazer. Navy was not dark, but the language of the form was sufficient to give Buckley a document. Mack took the form. He read it. Something shifted behind his eyes, a professional uncertainty, the hesitation of a man who understood institutional process. He said, "We should verify this more carefully." Eleanor heard that. She understood what it meant. She understood the particular gravity of the word carefully when it was deployed by someone who should have simply said no. She had spent 33 years listening to language that meant something other than what it said, and carefully in this context meant, "I know this is wrong, but I am not ready to say so in front of a uniformed officer and a complaint form that has already been filed." It meant I am calculating the risk of contradiction against the risk of complicity, and I have not yet reached a number I am comfortable with. It meant I would like more time. She did not give him more time by any action of her own. She simply waited. She was good at waiting. She had been in situations where waiting was the only available tool, and she had used it with the discipline of someone who understood that the value of waiting was not in the pause itself, but in what the pause allowed to develop. What it allowed in this case was the arrival of a text message on James Whitford's phone 3 floors above. She stood very still. She was wearing her grandmother's pearl earrings. She wore them to every gala. She had worn them to every opening keynote. They were the only piece of jewelry she never varied, never replaced, never left at home, regardless of which city she was in or how formal the evening required her to be. She thought they do not change what is true. Nothing they do in the next hour changes what is true. She stood still. Buckley said, "I'd like to take this to a side room while we work this out." Max said, "We have the Jasmine room off the east corridor. It's available." Eleanor said, "I prefer to remain in the lobby." Buckley said, "It is not a preference. Come with me." He still had his hand on her elbow. She moved, because she had calculated already what the next 40 minutes would require of her. And she understood that the room he was taking her to was not a room of confinement. It was a room where the truth would arrive at its own speed. The truth always arrived. She had built her entire adult life on that single fact. The Jasmine room was small and beige and smelled of carpet cleaner. There was a conference table, 6 chairs, a credenza with a water pitcher and a framed botanical print that no one had ever looked at deliberately. Buckley directed Eleanor to the far chair away from the door. Harris stood near the entrance. Buckley remained standing. The door closed. In the lobby, Diana Chen went back to the front desk. She did not go back to her work. She went to the hotel's internal communication system. She sent a message to the general manager's extension. There was no response. He was in the meeting on the 4th floor. She looked at her phone. She opened her contacts. She scrolled to a number she had never used in 3 years of employment. It was listed simply JW Personal. She sent a text. She typed Mr. Whitford. Ms. Eleanor Morrison is being detained in the Jasmine Room by police. I believe there is a misunderstanding. I need you to come down immediately. She put the phone face down on the desk. She looked at the door of the Jasmine Room. She would not leave her post. That was her job. Her job was to be at the front desk when it was needed. But she had done what she could do from where she was standing. She waited. In the Jasmine Room, Eleanor had set her portfolio on the table and opened it to the keynote. She was reading. Not performing the act of reading. Actually reading. Looking at the 3rd paragraph, the one she had rewritten 4 times, turning the sentence over. The room smelled of carpet cleaner and stale air conditioning. The particular smell of a room that exists to be used and not enjoyed. The ceiling was low. The fluorescent light overhead gave everything a slight flattening, the way artificial light makes people look more tired than they are. The botanical print on the wall was a watercolor of something orchid-like, generic, and unmemorable, the kind of art that had been chosen so carefully not to offend anyone that it had succeeded in communicating nothing at all. Eleanor had been in worse rooms. She had sat in federal holding areas waiting for paperwork to clear. She had sat in hospital waiting rooms when her mother had her hip replaced, and then her father had his bypass, and then eventually when neither of them could be fixed by any more procedures, and sitting was what the room required of her. She had sat in arbitration suites where the opposing counsel was doing everything in their power to make her feel small, and she had understood in those rooms the same thing she understood in this one: a room is not a verdict. A room is a location. You pass through locations. She was not afraid of this location. She was, if she was being precise with herself, tired. Not the tiredness of the day, though the day had been full. The tiredness of having to spend energy on something this specific, this familiar, this unnecessary. She had been doing this for 62 years. Not being detained, this was the first time she had been detained. But being seen as something she was not by someone who had decided what she was before she had a chance to offer any information. That had started earlier than 62 years. It had started before she could articulate what was happening to her. It had started in grocery stores and classrooms, and eventually in courtrooms, and she had spent 62 years choosing each time to remain exactly who she was, regardless of what the room decided to see. She was tired of the energy it cost. She was not going to show him that. She turned the page. Buckley said, "You need to put that away." She looked at him. She said, "I am preparing for a speaking engagement that begins in 43 minutes. Unless you are formally charging me with something specific, I will continue to prepare." He said, "You were observed tampering with hotel property." She said, "I was observed looking at a display case. No alarm has sounded. You have been unable to produce evidence of any tampering." He said the complaint was filed by a credible witness. She said the complaint was filed by a person who watched me look at a brooch. That is not tampering. It is tourism. Something moved through his jaw again. He said, "You think this is funny?" She said, "I think it is very serious. I think you will think so as well when you have had time to review the recording." He said, "What recording?" She said, "There is a gentleman in the lobby who began recording this interaction when you placed your hand on my arm without cause. He is a former United States Senator. He has been recording for approximately 12 minutes. Harris by the door went very still. Buckley said, "That doesn't matter." She said, "It matters considerably." He leaned forward. His voice dropped. He said, "I have a written complaint. I have you at the scene. I have the right to detain you while I investigate." She said, "You have a written complaint from someone who watched me stand near a display case. You have me at the scene of a public lobby where I have every legal right to be as a registered guest. You have a hotel card with my name on it that you declined to examine. What you do not have is probable cause to believe I committed a crime. What you also do not have is awareness of who I am, what I have built, or what the next hour is going to feel like." She paused. She said, "But you will." She looked back at her keynote. Buckley's face had flushed red along the collar. He was quiet for a moment. He stepped out of the room and spoke in a low voice to Harris. Harris said something back. Buckley said, "Just keep an eye on her." He went into the corridor. He found Walter Mack. He said, "I think we have enough to file charges. Attempted theft. We can upgrade later if the case supports it." Mack said, "I wouldn't advise that." Buckley said, "I'm the officer on scene. The complaint is documented." Mack said, "The complaint is documented, but the case has some issues." Buckley said, "What kind of issues?" Mack said, "The display case has a tamper alarm. It didn't trigger." Buckley said, "Maybe she was interrupted before she got into it." Mack said, "The alarm is pressure sensitive. If she had touched the frame, it would have triggered." It didn't. Buckley was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm filing the report anyway. She was at the scene. The complaint is filed. That's enough for tonight." Mack looked at him. He said, "It's your call." He walked away. Buckley leaned against the corridor wall. He crossed his arms. He looked at the door of the Jasmine room where a woman was sitting quietly reviewing her papers as though the entire event were a minor administrative delay and not a police detention. That composure enraged him in a way he did not have language for and would not have examined even if he had. He was convinced he had done the right thing. He had been convinced of this from the moment he saw her near the case. He had built the entire architecture of the evening around that conviction, and he was not at this stage capable of examining the foundation. He did not know about the Morrison wing. He did not know about the platinum card. He did not know that the hotel's head of guest relations had once described Eleanor Morrison in a staff meeting as the person who taught this hotel what hospitality was supposed to mean. He did not know about the gala. He did not know about the brooch. He did not know that the 2 prior complaints in his file, resolved internally and forgotten, had left a paper trail that connected to a federal monitoring system. He had never been told existed one that flagged repeat patterns in civil rights incidents involving law enforcement across the district and its surrounding jurisdictions. He did not know that a compliance officer had looked at his file twice in the past 12 months. He did not know that the second look had generated a notation that simply said, "Watch." He did not know that the woman sitting in the Jasmine room reviewing her keynote had prosecuted 8 federal civil rights cases in her career, including 2 involving law enforcement misconduct, and had won 6 of them. He did not know that Raymond Price in the lobby had been a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee for 8 years and still had friends in every federal office that mattered. He did not know about the 14 cameras. He knew he had a complaint form a location and the quiet fury of a man who had decided he was right. That was all he needed. He stood in the corridor and let the certainty hold him up because certainty was what he had instead of evidence. And at this stage in the evening, evidence had become secondary to the architecture of the story he had already built in his own head. He had seen something that confirmed what he had already decided. He had documented it. He had procedures. He had the complaint. He had followed protocol by his own accounting, and protocol was its own kind of protection. He was wrong about that. He had been wrong about that from the beginning, but he would not understand that until the second Tuesday of the following month, in a supervisor's office on the 4th floor of a precinct building when a folder was opened on the desk in front of him, and he saw for the first time the full picture of what he had walked into. In the Jasmine room, Eleanor put her glasses back on and turned to page 4 of the keynote. She had read 3 paragraphs when the door opened. It was not Buckley. James Whitford did not move quickly. He was not a man who moved quickly. He moved with the deliberate steadiness of someone who owns the room he is walking through, which in this case he literally did. He was in a tuxedo jacket and white shirt, silver cufflinks, the kind of formal that suggested he had been on his way somewhere important and had redirected. His face was controlled. His eyes were not. He looked at Eleanor. She looked at him. Neither spoke for one full breath. Then he turned to Officer Harris, who had straightened involuntarily the moment Whitford entered. Whitford said, "Where is the officer who filed this?" Harris stepped into the corridor and retrieved Buckley. Buckley came in. He looked at Whitford. Something in the tuxedo and the silver hair and the way the room adjusted to the man's presence gave Buckley a moment of uncertainty that he did not allow himself to show. He said, "Sir, are you affiliated with this hotel?" Whitford said, "I own this hotel." The words landed in the room with the weight of something structural. Whitford said, "This woman's name is Eleanor Grace Morrison. She has been a guest at this property for 15 consecutive years. She has stayed in Suite 1201 on 47 separate occasions. Her foundation has contributed over $3 million to justice education initiatives, including a matching gift that funded the wing on the third floor of this building which bears her name. She is here tonight to give the opening keynote at a fundraising gala for which she has personally raised over $14 million across 11 years. She is the reason 400 people are upstairs in my ballroom right now. And this morning at 11:15, I personally walked her through the lobby display case and pointed out the Edwardian brooch on the third shelf, because she had told me 3 years ago that her grandmother owned one identical to it. He paused. He said she touched nothing, because I was standing next to her. The room was absolutely silent. Buckley's color had changed. The flush was gone. In its place was something whiter, something draining the particular pallor of a man who has understood in one compressed moment the full geometry of his error. Harris looked at the wall. Whitford pulled out his phone. He opened the hotel's guest management application. He turned the screen toward Buckley. It showed a member profile photograph, a list of Stay's transaction records going back 15 years, and in the upper right corner of the screen, a gold badge icon with the words Platinum Lifetime Member. The photograph on the screen matched the woman sitting at the table. Whitford said you will also want to know that the display case has a pressure-sensitive tamper alarm installed by the Smithsonian Institution as a condition of the loan. That alarm has not triggered once since the display opened 10 days ago. The footage from the lobby cameras, all 14 of them, has been preserved, and my assistant has been in contact with our legal counsel since receiving a message from my front desk staff. He looked at Buckley. He said, I need you to release Ms. Morrison immediately. Buckley said, I have a filed complaint. Whitford said you have a complaint filed by a guest who watched a woman look at a museum display in a public hotel lobby. That complaint is not evidence of a crime. Your detention of Ms. Morrison without evidence, without an alarm trigger, and without checking the documentation she offered you at the time of first contact constitutes a significant legal exposure. Buckley said I was following protocol. Whitford said, then I'll let your supervisors assess your protocol. He turned to Eleanor. He said, I'm sorry this happened in this building. Eleanor looked at him. She said it happened in this building because it happens. We will discuss it, but not tonight. Tonight we have a gala. She stood. She gathered her portfolio. She straightened her blazer. She picked up her bag. She did not rush. The pace she set as she rose from the chair was the same pace she had set walking into the hotel 3 hours ago. The same pace she set walking into every courtroom she had ever entered. Unhurried. Certain. The pace of someone who knows that the speed of your movement tells the room something about how you view yourself, and she had not once in 62 years allowed a room to tell her who she was. She looked at Officer Harris, who was studying the carpet with the focus of a man hoping to become invisible. She held her gaze on him for 3 seconds, long enough for him to feel it. He did not look up. She understood that. She did not require him to look up. She required only that somewhere in the accounting he kept with himself, there be a line item for what he had witnessed and said nothing about for the 6 minutes he had stood by the door, while a woman who had done nothing was asked to open her bag. The accounting was not her business to enforce. She simply needed him to know that she had seen him see it. She looked at Officer Buckley, who was standing with his jaw set and his hands at his sides, and she gave him the one thing she had held in reserve throughout the entire hour. She gave him nothing. No anger. No triumphant expression. No satisfaction. No pity. She looked at him with the absolute emptiness of someone who has absorbed the full weight of what he did and filed it precisely where it needed to be filed. She did not show him that he had cost her anything. She did not show him that she had been tired in the Jasmine room, that the fluorescent light had been unpleasant, that the smell of carpet cleaner had reminded her of being somewhere she did not choose and could not change by moving. She did not show him what his hand on her elbow had felt like. She did not show him anything at all. She said, "Have a good evening, officer." She walked to the door. Diana Chen was in the corridor. She had come from the front desk the moment she saw Whitford go through the lobby. She was holding Eleanor's elevator card already keyed to the 4th floor. She held the door. Eleanor walked through. She stepped into the elevator at 6:54 in the evening. Raymond Price was in the corridor near the elevator bank. He had followed Whitford down from the 4th floor. He had his phone in his hand. He had been recording since the moment Whitford opened the door of the Jasmine room. He said nothing as Eleanor passed him. He gave her what she deserved, which was space and silence and the quiet dignity of a man who knew that some moments are not his to comment on. Eleanor stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. She stood alone in the elevator for the 11 seconds it took to reach the 4th floor. She looked at the reflection in the polished metal door. She looked at the woman in the navy blazer with the pearls at her collar and the portfolio under her arm. She looked at the pearl earrings. Cora Jean's earrings, the ones she wore to every gala, the ones she had worn to her swearing in and to the closing argument in the city councilman case, and to her mother's funeral, and to her father's retirement ceremony at the Postal Service regional office in Rockville. She had worn them tonight in a hotel lobby while a man put his hand on her elbow and told her to open her bag. She had worn them in the Jasmine room while she read a keynote about the purpose of justice under fluorescent light. She was wearing them now in an elevator alone, watching her own reflection in polished metal. She did not look diminished. She had expected perhaps that she might. That 62 years had not prepared her fully for the specific combination of this hotel and this evening and a hand on her elbow. She had expected some version of herself that appeared hollowed or shaken. She did not see that version. She saw the same woman who had walked into the lobby 3 hours ago, the same posture, the same pearls, the same navy blazer. What she had expected and what existed were two different things. That she thought was the whole story. She said to no one very quietly now, "Let us finish the work." The doors opened. The ballroom was ahead. Light and music poured from the open doors. She could hear the murmur of 400 conversations. She walked in at 7:06. The room found her within seconds. Heads turned. A current moved through the crowd. Someone near the back began to applaud a single pair of hands, then another, then a third, and within 8 seconds the whole room had joined. And Eleanor walked to the stage through 400 people, rising to their feet. Not for what had happened in the lobby, because most of them did not yet know what had happened in the lobby. They applauded because Eleanor Morrison had walked into the room, and that was always enough. Raymond Price was in the 3rd row. He had come up in the elevator directly after her had taken his seat without speaking to anyone. And now he stood with the others, his phone in his jacket pocket, the recording complete and saved. He watched her take the stage. He had known Eleanor Morrison for 22 years, and he had never once in those 22 years seen her look diminished. He was not surprised to find, after what had happened on the lobby floor, that she did not look diminished now. She looked, if anything, more settled, more certain. The kind of certain that comes from a test rather than the absence of one. He would post the recording at 9:18 that night after the last applause had faded and the ballroom had emptied, and he had sat in the lobby bar for 20 minutes with a glass of water and thought about what he had witnessed and decided that silence was not the right answer. She walked to the stage. She set her portfolio on the lectern. She took a breath that no one in the ballroom would have noticed as anything other than a pause. She looked out at 400 faces. She said, "I apologize for the delay. Something came up. I am resolved to not let it define the evening. The work we do here is too important." She paused. She said, "Let us begin." And they did. The investigation into Officer Ryan Buckley opened 14 days later. The footage from 14 lobby cameras was reviewed by an independent firm retained by the hotel's legal team and simultaneously by the internal affairs unit of the police department. Every second of Eleanor's presence at the display case was documented. She had stood at the case for 9 minutes and 32 seconds. Her hands had been in her pockets or at her sides for the entirety of that time. She had not touched the glass. She had not touched the frame. She had not reached toward the case at any point. In the last 40 seconds before she moved toward the elevator, she had removed her reading glasses, folded them, and placed them in her blazer pocket. That was the only physical action the cameras recorded from the moment she approached the display to the moment she stepped away from it. The display case's tamper alarm had never triggered. The Smithsonian Institution's security liaison confirmed this in writing within 48 hours of the hotel's inquiry. The alarm system was designed to trigger at 3 pounds of lateral pressure on the frame. It was sensitive enough to trigger if a curious child pressed their nose against the glass from the wrong angle. It had not triggered once in the 10 days the display had been installed. It had not triggered while Eleanor stood at the case. It had not triggered while the lobby moved with the preparation for the gala. The loan documentation specified that any trigger event required a full security review and potential removal of the items. No such review had been initiated. No such removal had been necessary. Buckley's personnel file contained 2 prior complaints, both filed within the previous 18 months. Both complainants were black women. Both complaints described the same sequence approach without cause demand for documentation, escalating detention without evidence. Both complainants had retained attorneys. Both complaints had been resolved internally with minimal documentation and no corrective action. The resolution language in both cases used identical phrasing officer, acted within scope of protocol, given information available at time of incident. The investigations had lasted respectively 11 days and 8 days. A civil rights attorney who reviewed the file later noted that the resolution language was not wrong precisely. It was constructed to be technically defensible while being operationally meaningless. A category of language she had seen so many times, she could identify it in the first sentence. The federal civil rights inquiry opened 6 days after the internal investigation concluded. The monitoring notation that had already flagged Buckley's file came into official relevance. The inquiry was conducted by a 3-person team from the Civil Rights Division, and it took 61 days. Buckley's badge was surrendered on a Tuesday morning in the second week of January. He handed it to his supervisor without speaking. He had been told in advance that the formal action was coming. He had retained an attorney who had advised him that the pattern documentation across 3 incidents was sufficient to make any argument of isolated error structurally unsustainable. He left the building at 9:42 and did not return. His attorney released a statement that contained the phrase, "Officer Buckley maintains that he acted in good faith based on the information available at the time." The statement received very little attention in part because it was released on the same afternoon that Raymond Price's recording crossed its 5th million views. Margaret Holloway was contacted by the hotel's legal team on the 3rd day after the incident. She was informed that her guest privileges at the Meridian Grand had been permanently revoked. She was also informed that the complaint form she had filed had been preserved in full in the investigation record and that it might be requested in any subsequent legal proceedings. She did not contest either point. She did not respond at all. Her attorney replied on her behalf with a single sentence acknowledging receipt. The woman in the cream-wrapped dress had watched Eleanor Morrison at the display case for 4 minutes and 20 seconds before making a call. She had described Eleanor as a suspicious individual in dark clothing. Eleanor's blazer had been documented in the camera footage as navy blue. The distinction was small and exactly the right size. Raymond Price's recording was posted at 9:18 the same evening after the gala concluded, and the audience had given their final round of applause. It received 4 million views in 72 hours and 6.1 million within a week. It showed 11 minutes of footage, beginning with Buckley's initial approach and ending with James Whitford's statement, "I own this hotel." It captured the moment Buckley placed his hand on Eleanor's arm. It captured the moment Diana Chen refused to step back. It captured Harris going still when Eleanor mentioned the recording. It captured Mac's hesitation in the corridor when Buckley said, "I'm filing the report anyway." It also showed in the background of every single frame the display case. Intact, alarmed, untouched. Diana Chen was promoted to Director of Guest Relations 2 weeks after the incident. James Whitford announced the promotion personally in a staff meeting that included every department head at the Meridian Grand. He did not elaborate on the reason. He did not need to. Everyone in the room had seen the recording. In her new role, Diana drafted the hotel's revised guest interaction protocol. It was a document that specified in clear and unambiguous language what forms of documentation constituted sufficient verification of guest status, what the appropriate sequence of escalation was before any law enforcement contact, and what the responsibility of hotel staff was when a registered guest was subjected to third-party complaint without physical evidence of wrongdoing. The protocol was reviewed by the parent company's legal team and adopted across 38 properties in 7 countries. The cover page of the final distributed document carried a single sentence in italics. "Every guest who walks through our doors has a name. Our job is to know it." Diana had not written that sentence with anyone in particular in mind, but she had written it the day after she read the transcript of James Whitford saying, "And this morning at 11:15 I personally walked her through the lobby display case. On the first morning of December, Eleanor Morrison sat at the desk in Suite 1201 and looked out the east-facing window at the city below. The Morrison wing was visible from the third-floor corridor. She could not see it from her window, but she knew it was there. She had been to the corridor 3 times since the incident, once the morning after, once the evening of the following day, when the building was quiet and the gala equipment had been cleared, and once the morning before she checked out. She had stood in front of the plaque all 3 times without any particular ceremony. Just stood, read the words, looked at the brass finish, moved on. The 3rd time she had stayed a little longer. She had read her grandmother's name, which was carved in the secondary dedication below the main text, in memory of Cora Jean Morrison, who understood that what you build for others outlasts everything else. The name had been her idea. The dedication language had been Whitford's. He had asked her what she would like the plaque to say about why the gift was made, and she had sent him the last sentence of Cora Jean's letter, and he had used it word for word. She had not expected to feel anything the first time she stood in front of the plaque. She had felt something anyway. She had stood there in the corridor and thought about a kitchen in Baltimore and the smell of cornbread and a woman with ruined hands from 41 years of sewing who had known something about permanence that it had taken Eleanor 30 more years of work to articulate. She thought about the brooch. She thought about the way it had sat on the black velvet in the case ivory and gold. The profile of a woman looking to one side with the particular composure of someone who has been asked to hold still for a very long time and has decided to do it on her own terms. The cameo woman was looking toward something out of frame. It was impossible to know what she was looking at. Eleanor had thought the first time she saw it that this ambiguity was the point. The woman was not looking at anything specific. She was looking at the direction she had chosen. She thought about her grandmother's kitchen in Baltimore, the smell of cornbread and old wood and the cedar of the wardrobe in the hallway. The weight of the pin in her small child's hand. The way Cora Jean had watched her hold it, without hovering, without nervousness, with the specific trust of someone who has decided that the thing she loves most is not too fragile to be touched. She thought 40 years between those 2 moments. Everything that happened in between. She thought about the Jasmine room. Not with anger. She had processed the anger in the elevator alone in the 11 seconds it took to reach the 4th floor. She had felt it move through her chest, and she had named it precisely the way she had learned to name difficult things, and she had set it where it needed to go. Not gone. Not forgotten. Filed. A piece of evidence that would serve its purpose in the proceeding that followed and had no additional value beyond that. She had delivered the keynote at 7:06. She had spoken for 32 minutes. She had not altered a single word from the text she had been reading in the Jasmine room when Buckley told her to put it away. She had delivered the 3rd paragraph exactly as she had written it, the version that was still not perfect, but was as close as she was going to get. And when she read it aloud in the ballroom, she understood finally why it had resisted revision. It was not the words that were wrong. It was that some things have to be spoken in the right room, before they are complete. The Jasmine Room had been wrong. The ballroom had been right. 400 people had listened. The gala had raised $2,300,000. It was the highest total in 11 years. She opened her portfolio on the desk and took out a new legal pad and a pen. She wrote the date at the top of the first page. Beneath it, she wrote, Foundation Year 12. Priorities. And then she began the list because the work of this year was done and the work of the next year was waiting, and she had never once in 62 years of living allowed the gap between those two things to be filled with anything other than preparation. She worked for 2 hours. The city moved below the window in the way cities move in early December purposefully, and without self-consciousness, everyone going somewhere they had decided to go. She watched it between paragraphs. The way you watch something that reminds you what the work is for the ordinary movement of ordinary people in an ordinary city, none of whom knew what had happened on the lobby floor the previous month, all of whom were living inside the structures that the work was meant to protect. The gala funded 7 law school scholarships this year. 3 of them went to students who were the first in their families to attend any graduate program. She knew their names. She had read their applications herself every year because she had decided in year 1 of the foundation that the person writing the check should know who was cashing it and why. She set down the pen when she had reached the end of the first page. She picked up her coffee. It had gone cold. She drank it anyway. She looked out the window at the rooftops and the pale winter sky and the particular quality of late morning light that makes December cities look both old and immediately present at the same time. She thought they do not get to take this. They never get to take this. Not the building, not the work, not the 40 years, not the woman in the brooch, not the letter, not Cora Jean's kitchen, not one thing. She thought about the corridor. She thought about the plaque. She thought about her grandmother's hands. She thought the ones who need to shout are the ones who know they have nothing. She had not shouted. She did not need to. What belongs to you, built in truth and maintained in discipline, outlasts everything they bring against it. Every single time. Subscribe our channel. We find the record and we read what it says.